She had forgotten how to love. But what if love was the one thing she never really lost? The sun streamed through the window of Clara's flower shop, casting a warm glow over the carefully arranged bouquets. Yet, there was something cold about the woman behind the counter. Clara moved with quiet precision, her hands gently arranging a wedding bouquet. The soft fragrance of roses and lilies filled the air, but her eyes, distant and unfocused, seemed to see nothing at all. With a final, delicate touch, she placed the bouquet into the trash can, her face betraying no emotion. The sound of the door chime startled her. A young man walked in, holding a nervous smile. "I need a bouquet," he said, glancing at the flowers around him. "For my girlfriend. It's for our anniversary." Clara glanced up, her voice sharp and cold. "Flowers can't fix a broken heart." She turned back to her work, her hands still, as if the words had meant nothing at all. The man hesitated, unsure of how to respond, before silently walking out. As the door clicked shut, Clara let out a soft breath, almost as if she'd forgotten how to sigh. Her gaze fell on the discarded bouquet in the trash, a symbol of love, now abandoned. In the small, sleepy town, her flower shop was an oasis of color. Yet inside, there was an emptiness that could never be filled by petals or stems. Why didn't Clara believe in love anymore? What had happened to her heart? Clara lived a quiet life in the small, sun-drenched town of Willow Creek, a place where nothing ever seemed to change. She wasn't lonely, but she was alone. Her days were filled with the gentle rustling of flower petals, the soft hum of a peaceful town, and the comforting presence of Miso, her gray tabby cat who kept her company through every quiet evening. Clara never minded the silence. In fact, it was her refuge. Each night, after closing her shop, she would curl up in her favorite armchair, the flickering light of a lamp casting a soft glow on her face, and read the old letters she kept tucked in a drawer. The letters were from a time when she had believed in love, when she had loved and been loved in return. But that was before everything had fallen apart. The pages, worn with age, held memories of a past that Clara tried to forget, but couldn't. Sometimes she would linger over the words, tracing the faded ink with her fingertips, as if hoping to resurrect the feelings she had once known. But after all these years, the letters had become nothing more than a collection of bittersweet ghosts. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, Ethan drove into Willow Creek, escaping the chaos of city life, in search of peace, inspiration, and perhaps a bit of redemption. He had recently finished a grueling book tour, and was tired of the noise, the constant chatter, and the endless expectations that came with his career as a novelist. He wanted something different, something simple, something real. When he arrived at the local inn, he explained his needs to the kindly owner. "I just need peace and a window with sunlight. That's all." The innkeeper, who had seen many travelers come and go, smiled and nodded. She showed him to a cozy room overlooking the main street, a place where the sun would wake him up in the morning and the quiet would settle in at night. The next day, as Ethan took a stroll around the town, he noticed the flower shop, a charming little place with a faded sign that read, "Clara's Flowers." The GPS had led him here by mistake, but it seemed like fate. He wasn't looking for flowers, but as a writer, he had a habit of collecting small details for his stories, and perhaps this quaint shop would provide just the right inspiration. He stepped inside, greeted by the subtle fragrance of fresh blooms. The shop was cozy, every corner filled with vibrant colors: roses, tulips, daisies, and lilies. But the owner, Clara, was nowhere to be found. Instead, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I help you?" He turned to find Clara standing behind the counter, her expression polite but distant. Her eyes were tired, as if she had been carrying a heavy burden for years. "I'm looking for flowers," Ethan began, unsure of what exactly he needed. "I'm working on a new novel, and I need something symbolic for a character, a gift, I suppose." Clara didn't ask any questions. She simply nodded and walked to a nearby shelf, pulling down a bouquet of white lilies. "These symbolize purity and a fresh start," she said, her voice calm and almost mechanical. Ethan nodded, unsure whether the bouquet was right, but the shop felt like a place where he could find something unexpected. As he paid and left, he glanced back at the shop, wondering about the woman who owned it. There was something about her, something that piqued his curiosity. She seemed like she was carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, a story she wasn't ready to. The next day, Ethan found himself standing in front of Clara's flower shop again. It wasn't intentional, or at least, that's what he told himself. He had left his room early, a restless energy pulling him through the streets of Willow Creek. Maybe it was the quiet town air, or maybe it was the feeling that something was waiting for him just around the corner. And just like yesterday, he found himself at Clara's doorstep. He pushed the door open, greeted by the soft chime that signaled his arrival. Clara was behind the counter, arranging a vase of wildflowers, her focus intense. Ethan hesitated for a moment, watching her work. There was something about the way she moved, so deliberate, yet distant, like a person lost in a world only she could understand. He cleared his throat, and she looked up. "Back again?" she asked, her voice neutral. Ethan smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I'm, looking for another bouquet. Something a little less cheerful." Clara raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. Instead, she nodded and walked over to a shelf, pulling down a single stem of deep red carnations. "This one might do," she said, holding it out to him. "It's often given to show admiration, but also symbolizes deep love and fascination." Ethan took the flower, inspecting it as though he were picking it out for a complex character, his fingers tracing the soft petals. "I'll take it," he said, but before he could turn to leave, Clara's voice stopped him. "You know what this flower means, right?" she asked, her tone a little sharper than before. Ethan froze. The question caught him off guard. He had no idea what carnations symbolized, but he didn't want to admit it. He cleared his throat again. Not really. What does it mean?" Clara's eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement. "It means fascination. And sometimes it means something more complicated." She leaned in slightly, her voice softening, as though sharing a secret. "Are you sure this is the one you want?" Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment rise in his chest. I don't know much about flowers," he admitted. "I'm just picking one for my story." Clara smiled faintly. "For your story." "That makes sense." Ethan couldn't tell if she was mocking him or just amused by his awkwardness. Either way, it was a moment of connection, however brief, and it made him feel strangely lighter. As he handed her the money and turned to leave, Clara's voice stopped him once again. "Come back tomorrow," she said, her eyes fixed on him with an unreadable expression. "I'll pick out something better for you then." The following afternoon, Ethan walked back into the shop, the door chime sounding almost like a greeting. Clara was there, as expected, and she looked up as he entered, her expression already softening. "I need something," Ethan began, shifting on his feet, trying to shake off the discomfort he'd felt the day before. "Something for a woman," a difficult one. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Difficult? Yeah, Ethan continued, taking a breath. The kind of woman who pushes people away. The kind who's closed off but doesn't quite realize it. She needs something that represents, I don't know, maybe a little hope or something. Clara studied him for a moment, then turned and began pulling down various flowers. She walked with a quiet grace, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. And yet, somehow, it felt like she was choosing these flowers just for him. After a moment, she returned with a bouquet of lavender, its soft purple hue standing out against the more vibrant flowers around it. She placed it on the counter in front of him. Lavender, she said, her voice soft but firm. It represents devotion and love. It's often given to people who are hard to reach, those who need a little extra tenderness. Ethan felt a strange pang in his chest as he took the flowers in his hands. The way she spoke about the lavender, it was almost as though she understood the complexity of the character he was writing better than he did. Clara handed him a small card with the flowers, a tiny note scrawled on it. Love comes when you least expect it, but you have to let it in. Ethan pocketed the card without a word, not wanting to seem too moved by something so simple. But as he walked out of the shop, he felt the weight of that small note in his pocket. He wondered if there was more to Clara than met the eye. He'd only known her for a couple of days, but something about her, a quiet sadness or strength, maybe both, pulled at him in a way he couldn't ignore. Back at his room, he pinned the lavender bouquet to his corkboard and carefully placed the card beside it, where he could see it every day. It felt like a small piece of something larger. As he looked at it, he realized he wasn't just writing a story anymore. It had been a week since Ethan had first stepped into Clara's shop, but today the air felt different. He could sense it, the subtle shift in the way she moved, the way she avoided his gaze just a little longer than usual. The day had started, like any other, with the sun shining down through the dusty windows of the flower shop. But as the afternoon wore on, dark clouds began to gather in the sky. By the time Ethan returned to the shop, a heavy rain had begun to fall. Clara glanced out the window, her expression distant as she watched the downpour. It wasn't the kind of weather that made for good flower sales, and she knew it. Ethan, standing just inside the door, hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You mind if I wait out the storm here?" he asked, his voice casual but carrying an underlying note of discomfort. He wasn't sure why he asked. Maybe it was the gloomy weather, or maybe it was the feeling that he needed to be near Clara, just for a little while longer. Clara nodded, barely looking up from the flowers she was arranging. "Sure. Take a seat," she said flatly, the words not quite reaching her eyes. She didn't seem to be in the mood for much conversation, but Ethan decided to take a seat anyway. The shop was quiet, save for the occasional sound of rain tapping against the windows. Ethan watched Clara as she moved about the room, but his gaze kept drifting to the radio sitting on the counter. It played soft, mellow tunes, the kind of songs that seemed to have a way of tugging at the heartstrings. He wasn't paying attention to the music at first, but then a song began to play. A slow, mournful melody that made the room feel even heavier. Clara froze. Ethan noticed her shoulders tense, her hands stopping mid-motion as the lyrics filled the air. He watched her for a long moment, confused by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Her face had gone pale, her lips pressed together as though trying to hold back something. Her hand hovered over the radio dial, trembling slightly, before she abruptly turned it off. The sudden silence in the room felt loud, almost as if the song itself had been a trigger. Clara quickly walked over to the other side of the shop, her back turned to him. Ethan knew better than to push, but the moment lingered in the air like an unspoken question. After a few minutes, he gathered the courage to speak. "You okay?" he asked softly. Clara didn't immediately answer. When she did speak, her voice was quiet, almost lost. "It's just a song," she said, her tone dismissive. But Ethan could hear the faint tremor in her words. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment. "You know," he began, hesitant but willing to share, "I once had a song that reminded me of someone. Every time it played, it felt like a piece of her was still with me, even though she was gone." He paused, unsure whether he should continue, but the weight of his own memories seemed to push him forward. She was a painter, always dreaming of opening a little art shop, right across from this place, in fact. We used to talk about it all the time. But his voice trailed off. The words stuck somewhere in his chest. "But she passed away, and I couldn't bring myself to write anymore. Everything feels dry now, like the words just left." Clara turned around slowly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softened as she looked at him. The vulnerability in his voice seemed to catch her off guard, and she could almost feel the echoes of his grief, much like her own. Without thinking, she found herself responding, her words quiet but steady. "I was supposed to get married," she said, her voice distant. "To him, I mean, but on the day of the wedding, he left, right there, in front of everyone. He told me he was in love with someone else." She let out a small, bitter laugh, as though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I guess that's what happens when you let yourself believe in fairy tales. They never come true." Ethan sat up straighter, the depth of her pain hitting him harder than he expected. He could see it in the way her eyes darkened as she spoke. About it, how the hurt still lingered in every syllable. She wasn't just talking about a broken engagement. She was talking about the shattered pieces of herself, the pieces she had tried to bury beneath the surface. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued to fall outside, its steady rhythm matching the beat of their shared silence. Then, without really thinking, Ethan stood up and walked over to Clara. He reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a quiet gesture of comfort that felt oddly natural. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice low but sincere. "I didn't know." Clara looked up at him, surprised by the warmth in his touch. For the first time since they'd met, she felt like someone truly understood the weight of her loss, the years of silence she had kept around her heart. And for a brief moment, she didn't feel so alone. As the rain continued to pour outside, the bond between them deepened in a way neither of them expected. There was no need for more words. They both understood the kind of pain that only time could heal. But for now, they had each other's quiet company, an unexpected solace in a world that had The days that followed seemed to pass in a quiet blur. Ethan continued to visit Clara's shop, more out of habit now than necessity. The rhythm of their interactions had settled into something familiar, a gentle back and forth of shared silences and meaningful looks. They were learning, in their own way, to navigate around the spaces between them, each hesitant to cross the invisible line, but both inching closer. One evening, as the golden light of dusk began to fade, Clara found Ethan sitting at the small table near the back of the shop, his notebook open in front of him. He was scribbling something, his brow furrowed in concentration. She watched him for a moment, then stepped forward, her hands full of fresh daisies she had just cut. "You look like you're thinking about something important," Clara said, her voice light, though she couldn't quite hide the curiosity in her tone. Ethan looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips, just trying to find the right words. It's like when you know what you want to say, but it just slips away. Clara placed the flowers on the counter, then walked over to him. Maybe you need someone to help you with the words, she teased, her smile softening as she watched him. Maybe, Ethan replied, his eyes twinkling as he closed his notebook. Actually, now that you mention it, maybe you can help me write. You're the one with the knack for making things sound right. Clara chuckled, her gaze shifting downward. I don't know about that, but I suppose I could give it a try, and so, that night, they found themselves in an impromptu lesson of sorts. Ethan teaching Clara how to put her feelings into words, and Clara teaching Ethan the art of crafting the perfect flower arrangement. At first, they both struggled with the unfamiliar territory, but soon enough, the exchange felt natural. Ethan explained the subtleties of tone, of capturing the delicate balance between longing and hope, while Clara guided him through the intricate steps of arranging petals with care, making sure every flower was placed just right. You know, you're better at this than you think, Clara said, observing the way Ethan gently placed a rose at the center of his arrangement. Ethan looked up, his smile genuine. Maybe I'm just a quick learner, he teased. But his eyes lingered on her face, noting the way the candlelight reflected in her eyes, softening the edges of her features. It was in that moment that he realized how much he had come to look forward to these quiet moments with her. How much her presence, her laugh, her gentle encouragement had come to mean. A week later, the town's annual festival arrived, bringing with it a burst of color and excitement. Clara had been asked to help decorate the bookstall for the festival, and of course Ethan had been roped in to assist. The entire street was lined with stalls, each brimming with food, crafts, and games. But the bookstall, where Ethan's work as a writer was showcased, stood proudly at the heart of it all. Clara arrived early, as always, with a basket of flowers in hand. These will look perfect for the stall, she said, motioning to the flowers she had picked out, a blend of soft lavender, pale yellow daisies, and pink peonies. Ethan was already there, stringing up colorful lanterns around the booth. I thought we could hang some of these around the top, he said, gesturing to the delicate paper lanterns he'd found in a nearby shop. It'll give it a nice, warm glow. Clara nodded, admiring his idea. Together they worked in harmony, the sound of their laughter blending with the music of the festival. They passed flowers and decorations back and forth, their hands brushing occasionally as they worked. The connection between them seemed to deepen with every shared glance, every fleeting touch. As they stood on the ladder, hanging the last of the lanterns, Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes warm in the dimming light. If you were a flower, he said, his voice low and thoughtful, I think you'd be the kind that blooms late, when the world is still, when everything else has already gone to sleep. But when you do bloom, you'd be the most beautiful thing there. Clara's heart skipped a beat. His words lingered in the air, hanging between them like the faint scent of flowers. She couldn't quite respond, her mind scrambling to catch up with the fluttering feeling that had taken root in her chest. Why do you say that? She managed, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan gave a small shrug, his eyes twinkling with something she couldn't quite name. I just think some things take time to grow, and you, Clara, you're worth the wait. Her cheeks flushed, but she couldn't bring herself to look away from him. There was something in his gaze, something unspoken, that made her heart race. She didn't know how long they stood there, simply looking at each other. But the moment felt suspended in time, as if the world outside had disappeared, leaving just the two of them. It was only when their hands brushed again, this time as they reached for the same bouquet of daisies, that the tension between them finally snapped. The soft touch of their fingers sent a shiver down Clara's spine, and she quickly pulled her hand away, her heart pounding in her chest. But Ethan didn't pull back. He lingered for a moment, his fingers brushing against hers once more. The connection was quiet, but it was enough to stir something deep inside her. She could feel it, the slow, steady growth of feelings she hadn't allowed herself to recognize until now. As they finished the last of the decorations and stepped back to admire their work, the glow of the lanterns casting soft light across the flowers, Clara realized something. She was no longer the woman who had shut herself off from love. She was starting to bloom, just like the flowers around her. The sun had barely set when Clara heard the words that would change everything. A customer, a regular, stood by the counter, casually flipping through a magazine, while Clara arranged a bouquet of daffodils. As she worked, the man muttered, almost to himself, "Did you hear? That writer, Ethan, he's about to sign a big contract in New York. Huge deal, you know? They're saying it'll change his career." Clara froze for a moment, the flowers in her hands feeling suddenly heavier. Ethan. New York. The words echoed in her mind, each one a sharp reminder that she had never really been part of his world. Just a quiet interlude. A temporary pause in the life of a man who had bigger dreams. Her heart sank as she realized the truth she had been too afraid to face. Ethan had never seen her as anything more than a brief escape from his bigger ambitions. She forced a smile, nodding absent-mindedly at the customer. "I'm sure it'll be great for him." The man continued talking, but Clara barely heard him. The image of Ethan, standing at the crossroads of his future, felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She had always known there was something distant about their connection, something she couldn't quite name, but hearing it so plainly struck a blow she wasn't prepared for. Later that evening, when the shop closed and the last of the evening, customers had left, Clara sat alone, the quiet of the store settling around her like a thick blanket. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, about Ethan's plans. She had always been careful, keeping a distance, but now it seemed like the distance had been there all along, a gap between them that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with who they were. As the days passed, Ethan's visits became more infrequent. The light, playful exchanges they'd shared began to fade. His presence in the shop was no longer a given, and Clara could feel herself withdrawing. What was the point of getting attached to someone who was only passing through? One evening, when the shop was quiet, Clara came in to find a single bouquet of orange blossoms on the counter. The vibrant petals of the flowers caught her eye, but it wasn't the flowers that made her stomach drop. It was the note tucked beneath them, written in Ethan's neat handwriting. "For you, a reminder of the time we spent together. No regrets." No regrets. That phrase, so impersonal, hit her harder than she expected. It was final. He was gone. But it wasn't the lack of an explicit goodbye that hurt. It was the absence of a reason. Ethan hadn't told her he was leaving, hadn't even said goodbye in person. He had simply disappeared. Clara's heart twisted in pain. She felt betrayed, though she knew there had never been an official commitment between them. The silent goodbye felt like a slap in the face. She had opened herself to him, had let herself believe that, perhaps, just perhaps, something could have grown between them. But now, she was left with nothing but the scent of flowers and the ache in her chest. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't bring herself to open the shop the next day, or the day after. For 3 days, Clara didn't step foot inside the flower shop. The door was locked, the sign flipped to closed. She needed space, time to herself to process the hurt, the disappointment, the crushing realization that she had been just a moment in Ethan's life, a fleeting chapter in a story that was already moving on without her. But with each passing day, the emptiness of the shop mirrored the emptiness inside her. The flowers, once so vibrant and alive, now seemed to wither in the silence. And Clara knew, deep down, that she couldn't stay away forever. But she wasn't ready to face Ethan. Not yet. Not when her heart was still tangled up in the confusion of what they had and what they never would. The sound of the doorbell chimed through the quiet flower shop, pulling Clara from her thoughts. She looked up, surprised to see a package resting on the counter. It was a simple brown envelope, nothing out of the ordinary, yet her heart skipped a beat. She reached for it slowly, almost afraid of what it might contain. She hadn't expected anything, and the unexpected had a way of unsettling her these days. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside was a manuscript, pages of crisp white paper filled with black ink. Her eyes skimmed the title, The Florist Who Forgot How to Love. Her breath caught in her throat. A note fell from the pages. She picked it up with a sense of disbelief. The handwriting was unmistakable. To the one who taught me how to bloom again. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the words echoing in her mind. She had read that phrase before, in a fleeting conversation, in the small moments they had shared. But now it was here, in ink, in a way that felt both final and yet so full of possibility. The manuscript, the words, everything was a gift. From Ethan. Before she could gather her thoughts, a soft knock came at the door. Clara's heart fluttered in her chest. It couldn't be. Could it? She rushed to the door, pulling it open to find Ethan standing there, drenched from the rain, his clothes clinging to him as water trickled from his hair down his face. In his hand, he held a bouquet of lavender, the purple flowers vibrant against the grayness of the storm. His eyes locked with hers, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "I wrote it," Ethan said softly, his voice almost drowned out by the rain. "I finished the book, but—" He paused, his gaze dropping to the bouquet. "I still haven't written the ending. Not the real one. Not without you." Clara's chest tightened, and for a moment she could hardly breathe. Ethan stood before her, the man who had once seemed so far removed from her world, now so close, so real. She had felt the distance between them like a weight. But now everything felt different. Clara began, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him how much she had missed him, how his absence had left a hole in her heart. But instead, she stepped forward, almost instinctively, and took the bouquet of lavender from his hands. The delicate flowers smelled like fresh beginnings, like something precious that had been waiting for just the right moment to bloom. "I don't need to read the ending," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I already know how it ends." Ethan's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. The rain fell in soft sheets around them, but the moment between them was warm. Clara reached out, her hand brushing against his, before her fingers curled around his. She stepped closer, the rain still falling, but it didn't matter. It was as if the storm outside couldn't touch the stillness they had found in each other. Without a word, Ethan took a step forward, closing the gap between them. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting moment. The world, outside, fading into nothingness. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I was afraid I'd lose myself in the words and forget how to feel. But you helped me find my way back." Clara smiled softly, her heart aching with a tenderness she hadn't known in so long. "You don't need to be afraid," she said, her voice steady. "We've both been lost. But now, we're here." As she looked into his eyes, something changed between them. The unspoken tension, the doubts, the uncertainty, they melted away. All that was left was the promise of something new, something beautiful. A love that had been waiting to bloom, despite the storms of the past. Ethan's. Lips found hers in a kiss that felt like home, like the end of a story that had... The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of the flower shop, casting long rays across the freshly swept floor. Clara stood behind the counter, arranging a bouquet of soft pink peonies and white lilies, her movements gentle and practiced. It had been several months since Ethan had returned to her life with his manuscript, and in that time, everything had changed. Not just in the shop, but within her as well. The sign above the door now read, "In Bloom, a new name for a new beginning." It had been Ethan's idea, a nod to the transformation that had taken place both in the flower shop and in their hearts. The shop, once a place of quiet solitude, now felt vibrant with life, much like the love that had slowly bloomed between them. The air always smelled of fresh flowers, and there was laughter and warmth where there had once been silence. In the far corner of the shop, nestled among the potted plants, was a display featuring the first edition of Ethan's book, The Florist, Who Forgot How to Love. The cover, adorned with an image of a delicate lavender flower, stood proudly on a wooden shelf. Clara had been the first to read it, and she still couldn't help but smile every time she saw the book. The words forever etched in her heart. She had never realized how much their lives were intertwined until Ethan had poured his soul onto those pages. As she arranged the flowers, Clara looked up and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, holding a small potted plant in his hands. He had always loved to surprise her with small gestures, and today was no different. He grinned as he walked toward her, his eyes full of warmth and affection. "Look what I brought," he said, setting the plant down on the counter. It was a tiny lavender plant, a symbol of their first meeting, the very flower he had given her that rainy evening. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with happiness. "I think we're going to need a bigger garden," she teased, glancing toward the back of the shop, where they had started planting a small garden together, one of many new projects they had taken on in the month since they'd found each other again. Ethan chuckled softly, stepping closer. "How about we make it a whole garden?" he suggested, his hand reaching for hers. "A place where we can plant new memories, new dreams." Together, Clara's smile softened, and she squeezed his hand, the warmth of his touch grounding her in this perfect moment. "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea," she replied. They walked together to the back of the shop, where a small patch of earth had already been cleared. The soil was rich and ready to receive whatever flowers they would plant next. The garden was already beginning to bloom, a reflection of the love that had taken root between them. As they knelt down beside each other to plant the new lavender, Clara felt a peaceful contentment settle over her. It was the same feeling she had when she'd first walked into the flower shop, except now it was filled with hope, with promise. "Ethan," Clara said softly, her voice a whisper of contentment. "I never imagined this kind of happiness, but I'm so glad it's here." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. "Neither did I," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But now that we're here, I wouldn't trade it for anything." As they worked side by side, planting flowers and nurturing their shared dreams, the world around them seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the simple joy of being together, of tending to something beautiful that had grown from the seeds of their love. And in that moment, it felt as though their hearts were blooming just like the flowers in the garden they had created together. The door to the shop swung open, and a gentle breeze filled the room. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, and the world seemed full of possibility. Clara and Ethan smiled at each other, their hands still intertwined, knowing that they had found something truly beautiful, something that would continue to grow forever. At its core, The Florist Who Forgot How to Love is a beautiful reminder of the power of healing, second chances, and the unexpected ways love can enter our lives. Clara's journey from a heartbroken, guarded woman to someone willing to open her heart again shows how sometimes we need to face our past in order to embrace a brighter future. Ethan's presence in her life is the catalyst for change, proving that love can grow in the most unexpected places, often at a time when we least expect it. This story also highlights the importance of personal growth and the way our past experiences shape who we are, yet they don't have to define our future. Through the connection between Clara and Ethan, we see that vulnerability, trust, and taking risks are key ingredients for building meaningful relationships. Have you ever experienced a moment where love surprised you when you least expected it? What do you think Clara and Ethan's future holds now that they've found each other? If you've enjoyed this heartwarming journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more touching stories of love, healing, and growth. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest videos.